why would anyone line with a mag? Hey, I'm Jake from the Fireside Tattoo Network, and I think that's what we call this video, something like that. Why would you line with a magnum? Something along those lines. Uh, and if you followed our show, if you followed the podcast for any period of time, you probably know that we tend to focus more on drawing related problems as they relate to tattooing rather than on solving technical problems. That is something at this point that's still really best done in a traditional apprenticeship in a one-on-one atmosphere and nearly impossible to do online or through YouTube. So that's why we focus mainly on drawing. So given that bit of knowledge, the title to this episode may seem a little strange because it seems like we're trying to give technical advice, but it's really no different. What I intend to focus on in this episode is helping you to recognize the unique types of marks that tattoo machines and different needle configurations are able to make and how to use those marks in your own way to kind of create your own unique voice in tattooing, create your own unique work. A lot of us, if you've been tattooing for any period of time, or even if you're just starting out, the typical process is lining, shading, coloring, wrapping up, you're done. And this is a little more advanced than that. It kind of turns that on its head a little bit. So, quick disclaimer, if you are still fairly early on in your tattoo career, or if you are an apprentice and your mentor says, I don't care what Fireside says, you're not lining with a mag, please listen to your mentor and ignore me. They have a better feel on what your skill set is right now, where you stand, and how to best guide you. I'm kind of putting this out for the more advanced viewers, people that are maybe a little bit stagnant, feel like that they're doing the same types of things over and over, and I'm hoping this kind of gives you a shot in the arm and maybe allows you to have a fresh approach on how to go about some of your large-scale designs, some of the more unique pieces that you're taking on. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Please feel free to leave a comment below. We'll do our best to get back with you, to respond to your comments. And if you like it, click like. If you don't, click don't. Thanks. All right, let's dive in here. This is about a 30-plus hour back piece that I'm trying to cram into about 15 minutes. So we're going to be cutting through this at a pretty decent clip. And I'm just going to focus on the main elements of designing a tattoo this way. So I tend to start a lot of my large scale work just with a very loose marker drawing. I find that it's more efficient and a lot faster than trying to make a lot of stencils to line up and stick on the skin. And with large organic pieces like this one that kind of can flow in different directions, this just is just a more natural way for me to approach it. And you see here as I block in with this light colored marker that I'm thinking in terms of masses right now and not in terms of lines. So as opposed to like making a stencil that was a line drawing and I would have the edges of all of these branches really clearly defined. The way that I'm scrubbing it in with this marker is more like I'm thinking about dark and light masses rather than the outline of any of these shapes. I should also say that this idea of lining with a mag, I didn't come up with. A lot of tattooers have done this for years, and I talked to Guy Aitchison about it when we interviewed him a year or so ago, and he said he first heard of a group of tattooers in, I want to say Indiana, in the 80s, lining with mags. Because they were having a hard time making liners work properly, getting solid lines in the skin, and they found it was easier to get the marks they were looking for with the mag, which proves my point here is that there's tons of different types of marks that tattoo machines can make and different needle configurations can make to get different effects, and it's important to find what works for you and not just rely on what everyone has told you is the proper way to go about it. So as we cut forward here, I've roughed in the entire tattoo at this point with just a 5 mag and black ink. So it looks like we have a wide variety of grays and blacks, but really it's just the amount of pressure I'm putting down with my hand and the speed of my hand and how many times I'm going over it that's giving that illusion of it being, or that's making it darker or lighter. And even though some of these lines look halfway solid, they're really kind of soft at the edges. If you get up close to it, which I think we will here in just a minute, you'll see that it looks kind of like a rough charcoal drawing, like you got a piece of compressed or vine charcoal and just went through and roughed out a basic shape. It's kind of loose at the edges, and that's what I want. With this tattoo, I wanted to give the effect that it was kind of moving back in the distance, that it was kind of painterly, kind of atmospheric, and outlining all of my branches with, like just a traditional liner wouldn't have given me that effect quite as easily, because all of the edges would have been sharp enough that they would have kind of wanted to jump forward. And I want some of these edges to fall way back into the distance and almost go away, like we're looking through the atmosphere into the distance. Another cool thing, as you can see right here, is that I'm able to kind of invent shapes or adjust shapes on the fly. So like, for example, that branch that I'm working on wasn't even there a second ago. And as I start to build these shapes, this gives me the freedom to say like, well, I'd like this branch to be a little bit fuller and this branch to be a little more sparse. I'm always trying to think of contrasting shapes, so heavy shapes as opposed to light shapes, dark shapes as opposed to light shapes, things like that. And taking this approach with a real organic tattoo like this and this type of needle configuration, which you can move through the skin really quickly and efficiently without really beating it up too bad, it's great for this type of approach. I'm focusing on a single light source here. I'm just thinking of my light coming from above. I'm thinking about a cylinder. I'm not thinking about a tree branch. I am building some texture in as I go, but if that starts to get confusing to me, I just go back to thinking, well, this is just a cylinder with light coming from the top. And I'm just thinking of dark and light shapes at this point. All of my edges are nice and soft because I haven't used a liner at all just yet. I mentioned that we're going through this tattoo kind of quickly. If you want to see a longer version of this video, we've got a 40+ minute version in our foundations course, and it tackles my entire thought process from start to finish on this piece. It follows our Fireside principles of shape, value, edge, and color. And it is included in your Foundations membership. If you want to learn any more about Foundations, I'll make sure that there's a link in the video description here, and you can go to a video that tells you what Foundations is about. It's basically a drawing-focused course that tackles the specific issues that tattooers face. So right now I'm going through and I'm trying to separate my foreground branches from my midground branches from my background branches. So a lot of times when you see tree tattoos, say like a tree of life or something like that, they'll tend to look really flat, like every branch is sitting on the same plane. And I don't want that to happen. I want to give the illusion that the tattoo is moving back further into space. So what I've done basically here is I'm still using straight black. Any variations or gradations that I'm getting is only through how I move my hand and not through moving to gray or watered down ink at all. But I'm starting with my mid-ground branches. My foreground branches being right there. You can see them in the front, the two kind of big ones that are very light. There's going to be a lot of light hitting those. My mid-ground branches are my darkest branches, and then my background branches are a little bit lighter. So here is that first sitting completely healed and settled in, and you see all of these edges are really light. It just looks like a charcoal drawing, right? You see that some of those branches go back into the distance, and that was done just with straight black ink and a 5 mag, and I just kind of whipped through and changed the pressure and the speed of my hand to get those effects, and I've got a really nice base now to build color on top of. It's not perfect. It's not smooth blends all the way across, but it's in there solid enough for me to work from. I've got a great foundation of darks and lights, and I know where I'm going moving forward. There's kind of a rough idea looking into the Cintiq here of what I think it's going to look like, and it is pretty rough. I don't typically overplan big tattoos like this. I like to let them evolve kind of naturally. So here is after the first pass of color, still no line. I still haven't lined anything. All of these shapes have been made with a mag. I've moved to a larger mag configuration at this point to do a lot of the color, but it's all very muted tones, browns, gray undertones laid straight over the top of that black. So a lot of my value decisions were already made. The hierarchy of the design as far as where my lights are going to catch, that decision was made before I ever got to color. You can see as we cut through it here and it's settled in that what's drawing your attention before we get any of our bright color in, what's drawing your attention is these two main branches that come forward, and you've got a skin tone that's catching a lot of light. And that was all done before I ever got to color. All those decisions were made and all those problems were solved on that first pass of just black. So now we're getting into color, and I'm going to start to get a lot more vibrant, a lot more saturated at this point. We're always thinking about contrast. We're contrasting dark shapes to light shapes, large shapes to small shapes, muted color to intense high chroma color. And edges we're using very soft and almost lost edges all the way up to very, very sharp edges. Up to now, I still haven't used a liner at all. I'm doing all of this with mags. starting to lay in some of my lighter background tones here. As I started to work those reds up his left side, I was starting to realize that this tattoo could get really heavy really quickly if I wasn't careful. So I broke away from that area and found an area of kind of intense light in the background where I can have some lighter kind of relief areas for the eye pushing through the branches more to the center of the tree, just to keep it from getting so heavy and dense. And you can see a lot of these reds I just laid straight over the top of my color and of the black and gray on the branches. I'm just laying kind of brick reds right over the top of them, and it's almost like glazing a painting. I'm just kind of tinting the tattoo whatever direction I want it to go. If the red is in the shadows, I might cool the red off to more of a magenta. As the red comes into the light, I might warm it up and go more towards oranges and yellows and warmer tones. Now, this type of approach of using these kind of painterly marks, these really loose marks, these soft edges, tends to work better in larger multiple sitting tattoos for me. You might find that you can use it in a single session, one-shot tattoo. But for me, I like to see all of those soft edges kind of settle in, see some of those muted colors kind of settle in, and then decide where I want to come back and push them out in future sittings. If I had to do it all in one sitting, I probably would approach it a little more traditionally. I probably would go ahead and get my lines in there, make sure that I got my colors all saturated on the first pass. But the reason that I love tattoos like these big kind of organic shapes that I get to look at 3, 4, 5 times before I call it finished. I love the freedom that these types of tattoos give me to make decisions, to see what's working and what's not working. I love a painter who has a great YouTube channel. His name is Andrew Tischler, and anytime he looks at a painting, when he starts the day, when he's been away from it for a while, he asks himself, what's working, what's not working, and what if? And I've started to ask myself that too. What's working about this? Well, I love how those shapes in the immediate foreground are catching all the light. Well, what's not working? Well, some of these branches in the background are getting a little more dense than I want. Well, what if I introduce little pops of light in between them? That kind of thing. And if you're always asking yourself those questions, then you're always becoming a better problem solver. So I'm going through in the sitting and just kind of re-saturating those reds, making sure that I've got smooth blends. You can see as I moved down into the roots that I went to this kind of sap, weird, off greeny yellow color. So I wanted to use a complement here, but I didn't want it to be too intense. So I went from red to green, which is a complement, but I went from a really intense red and I contrasted it with a very muted, kind of desaturated green, so that I'm using both color contrast, value contrast, and chroma contrast, intensity of a color as opposed to a muted version of another color. And really, if you look at it right now, you might say, well, there's no need to put any lines in this tattoo. It reads just fine. But as we come in and we put lines in at the end, I think you'll see what a huge difference they make, and you'll see the point of approaching it in this way, where you're really thinking about where you want to draw attention towards the end of a tattoo and using your edges to push attention that way. You can kind of see these abstracted skulls that are in the trunk of the tree. The client wanted me to hide some skulls in a tattoo, and I'm not really crazy about that kind of thing. I like to make my tattoos a little more obvious. So I didn't so much hide it, but what I did do was made it a secondary element. There's a skull kind of laying in there, but it's not as important as the larger branches in front of it that are catching all of the light. I kind of dropped it into the shadows a little bit so that it wasn't a tattoo about a skull. It was a tattoo about a tree, and then the skull is kind of a secondary element. And I did that by limiting the value range in the skull. It doesn't approach the lightest lights. All right, so here it is. We're probably 30 hours into this tattoo, and I am just now using a liner for the first time. And if you look at that mark that I just made right here on this little chunk of tree trunk, it kind of jumps forward, and all of those branches that are off to the side of it and that go back in the distance soften and mute even further now that we have the contrast of that really bold, crisp line in the foreground. And so that's really why I like this type of approach. It allows me a lot of freedom. I can come back at the end of a tattoo and say, okay, where are my 3 to 5 sharpest edges in this whole tattoo? Let me go ahead and make those things super sharp, super bold, and so that they come forward, and then the contrasting edges that are softer kind of fall back into the distance. And when I started this tattoo, I probably didn't know that that part of the tree was something I wanted to focus attention on. That's something that was kind of revealed to me throughout this process, throughout the tattoo. I've slowly realized, okay, I really like how this branch is coming forward, so I probably want to push that. Now I'm coming back into the nasal cavity of that skull and just sharpening that edge slightly. This is also a great time to come back and lay in your darkest darks. We laid all those blacks in on the front end, and then we came through and we blasted color over the top of all of them. And that will knock blacks back, 10-20% as they settle in. So these last sittings, when I come back and I'm sharpening all these edges, I'll also go through and find all my blackest black, which is normally like cast shadows that are falling from one shape onto another, or the dark side of a form. And I'll just kind of block in those darkest darks and kind of resaturate them. You can see right now I'm doing that on this branch off in the distance here. It's the underside of a branch. I'm darkening it because I want the head of that skull to come out just a little bit further. And I'm always just kind of looking at this point and saying, okay, well, if the light is coming from here, would that branch have a darker shadow on the underside of it? Or would it cast a shadow onto the branch that is just past it? And taking this general to specific approach in this type of tattoo allows me to do that. Now, if this were a full back mandala, then obviously everything that I'm talking about here goes out the window. This works really well on organic kind of painterly tattoos like this. Now, that's not to say that you won't find another use for it. It works well for me in this setting. You may find a use for using a 5 mag in a mandala. I don't know. But what I'm encouraging you to do through this video is to just explore, experiment, make sure that you're seeing your tattoos come back healed. Get people to swing back by, and offer them 10% off of another tattoo if they'll make sure to come back in and let you look at this one healed, just so that you see what's working and what's not working. A lot of times we end up, when we're not seeing tattoos all the time, we end up kind of guessing and assuming that something worked out, and we really don't know whether it does or whether it did or whether it didn't. And here we are doing it over and over again, and so you end up kind of forming bad habits a lot of times, and not knowing what's working and what's not, just because you don't get to see your healed work as often as you should. So putting the fire out here so the client can get an idea of what it actually looks like. And you can see those edges as we zoom in here, those ones that were made with the 5 mag, they're soft, they're kind of atmospheric, even the ones in the foreground. And that's what I wanted. I wanted this thing to kind of give the illusion that it was moving back in the distance. And for the most part, I think it worked well. There are a few things that I would do differently, but that's why we do this. We do a tattoo to the best of our ability, and then we let it settle in, and we look at it and we say, okay, that worked great, that didn't work so well, I'll come back to this next time. I feel like there are a few decisions I could have made in the roots that would have made them a little more dynamic, but here we go. This was the healed first sitting right here, all blacks, settled in, a lot of variety of edges, full value range. Here it was with the first pass of color, just very muted colors right over the tops of those blacks, and you can see how they knock those blacks back so much, settle them down a lot. And then finally the finished tattoo. So that's it. I hope you got something out of this. Like I said, experiment, see what works, see what doesn't work, and let us know what you think. Thank you guys as always for supporting what we do.